proof, seeing yourself and proving to yourself helps all of us. If we can watch ourselves do something or prove ourselves, and we can see the results, we can say, I did that. I can feel good about that. I just observed myself doing that. And that contributes to self-love. And that's where this part of us relating to others can come out. We can observe ourselves actually giving to others and go, I'm giving to others. That's a good relationship with myself. Yeah. I need to freely give love on that channel. Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We are rolling right along in our series, looking at all of the 16 Myers-Briggs types, Antonia. We're talking about how each type can love itself. So if you are each of these types, we're going to talk about using your personality and the framework of your personality to find access points for self-love. A lot of people struggle. We talked about this in the framing episode. A lot of people struggle with self-love. They feel like it might be a transactional framework for them. They might think they have to earn the right to feel love for themselves. So we talked a little bit about if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're giving and receiving love, that's a free gift. You can't really earn love. You have to really give it freely. If it's earned, it's not really true love, right? It's not conditional. It's unconditional love you give for free. But there is a component of a relationship dynamic that allows the expression and interchange of that love. And that's what a relationship is. There's expectations, conditions, unspoken and spoken agreements and contracts and promises made in relationships that all that love is carried on. All those connectors are carried on. So love is free, but relationship does take effort. It takes some kind of investment for that to be the case. And we said in that framing episode that it also applies to the self. So just with like another person, yes, love is given freely, but there's some expectations of the relationship. Loving yourself is given freely, but there are some expectations you can have for yourself. And that's what we want to talk about today for the INTP personality. If you're an INTP listening along, this is going to be very valuable for you. We're going to go down into the cognition of your mind. We're going to talk about the wiring of your mind, how your cognitive functions show up. And we're going to go through and talk about self-love and the framework of that. And at the end of the episode, as we wrap up, we're going to talk about all of the other 15 types. So if you're not an INTP and you're just listening along to tune into the INTPs in your life or just know more about them, we're going to talk about what we can learn about self-love from INTPs through this framework.
Mm-hmm. A couple other things we should probably establish, since we've been establishing them in every episode, and this might be a one-off for somebody, is, like you mentioned, love is not earned. Good relationships are earned through hard work and making sure that we are keeping them healthy. But self-love is not something that we can earn. And it is something that we're actually attempting to give ourselves all the time. We are always trying to express love towards ourselves. And most of the time, the challenge is receiving the love we're trying to send. We put obstacles in our way. We have gatekeepers. We have all sorts of, there's no end to how many different ways that we deny ourselves love, especially from ourselves. It makes me think of the Anna Karenina quote about all happy families are the same, but all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. All self-love, all given and received love for the self is the same, right? It's an open channel, but there are a million different ways that we can deny ourselves self-love. So what this algorithm or this framework that we're using to talk about how each personality type can fall in love with oneself is predicated more on removing obstacles to feeling the love you're already trying to communicate to yourself more than it is activating it or earning it.
Yeah.
So part of what we'll be talking about as we go through is this is when we talk about setting expectations and when we talk about the things we can do to feel that more flow of love. It's not about having done the right thing. It's not about, like I was withholding love for myself until I accomplished a certain thing and now I can give it to myself. That's not the premise. The premise is never withhold love from yourself. Never act like it's earned. Always act like it's something that should always be freely flowing on an open channel. But make sure you're in a healthy relationship with oneself. And when you do that, just like when we're in a healthy relationship with another person, it's so much easier to keep that channel open.
Yeah. This is going to be more valuable for you if you can tune into the framework we're going to use. So if you have an INTP owner's manual from Personality Hacker, it's just a program that walks you through your cognition, because INTP is just 4 letters that really show you how your mind is wired. Shows you how you learn information and you perceive your world. And then it also shows you how you make judgments or decisions based on that information. So we're going to take out of the entire owner's manual is powerful for an INTP to go through. It talks about flow states and loops, getting into grips, the translator part of you that can help translate between the parts of you that are more challenging and the parts of you that are excellent. It goes over a bunch of things and gives you tools and applications, but we're going to pluck out of that owner's manual the car model framework. And this is a great metaphor or a way to look at our cognition. And every personality type has this framework, and we're going to apply INTP to it. So just imagine your mind is a 4-passenger car. You have a driver, you have a co-pilot, and then in the back seat of that car, you have a little 10-year-old and a little 3-year-old sitting back there. Just kind of just a way to imagine your personality. The driver for an INTP, technically called the dominant cognitive function. Its technical name is introverted thinking. We've nicknamed it accuracy. It's about precision. It's about data. It's about internal consistent logic. I mean, it does a bunch of things. I'm going to blitz through these. I'm just going to get a quick, table of contents, if you will. So INTP's listening. It's not comprehensive, and it may be slightly inaccurate to move fast, but it is looking for accuracy, consistency, logical consistency, precision. These are things that this function wants, and it's a decision-making function. It's how an INTP best makes their decisions in the world. The co-pilot for an INTP, technically called the auxiliary function, we've nicknamed it exploration. Its technical name is extroverted intuition. And this is all about external pattern making, using your imagination, asking the what-if questions, taking 2 things that are seemingly disparate and putting them together and making something new out of it, or multiple things, I should say, creating patterns and connections in the outer world to get new results. And this is a powerful part for INTPs. This is a lot of what they bring to the world. This is how they perceive their world and move through their world. There's a lot of gifts they can bring here to others, and to it's a lot of the things that they're interested in, the creative things or technical things or whatever it is. This can really be an important part of their personality. Sitting right behind that process at the co-pilot level, we've put the certainty and maturity level around a 10-year-old kid. This is a part of you as an INTP. We've nicknamed the process that lives here for INTPs as memory. Technical name is introverted sensing. It's all about precedent, what's come before, procedure, who I am in relation to who I have been, and over time, tracking changes and seeing the differences over time. It's often tuned into precedent and keeping things connected in more of a holistic way in society. Things like this can come up from this for an INTP. It also can be a part of an INTP that gets into rhythm or routine. It can keep them on something like a schedule or something like this. Right behind the driver then is the next part of your cognition as an INTP. We've put it at about the development and certainty level of a 3-year-old child. Just as a quick kind of a diagnostic there. This function is technically called extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. It's about the relationship between people. The getting needs met can be the most sophisticated attunement of this function, like really knowing what somebody needs and then providing it for them. But human connection, knowing where you are in a social group, knowing the rules of social groups and the manners that are expected, all of these things come from this function. It does so much more than that. I'm overgeneralizing it just for, brevity. But this part of you is, you have a certainty level, about a 3-year-old here. And so there could be some deep uncertainty for you moving through the world. And as an INTP, you may not know the rules and you may try to avoid some of this. So as we talk about self-love for an INTP today, we're going to look at each of these parts of you in this car model coming out of the, the owner's manual for INTPs at Personality Hacker. And we're going to land some ways. I think the best way to look at it, like we've been doing, Antonia, is to say, what's the expectation of all these parts of ourselves? If something's more available to us, the expectation should be higher. If it's more of a childlike part of ourselves, like that 3-year-old, well, let's talk about what the proper expectation is there for you as an INTP. And if you have an INTP in your life, follow along. You're going to learn a lot about them today.
Yeah. That idea of setting the right expectations is an important part of any relationship. If you don't have any expectations for the person you're in a relationship with, then you're setting yourself up to be taken advantage of. We should expect the people in our lives to do their best. But if we have unreasonably high expectations of the people in our lives, then we might crush their spirit. We might always be disappointed in them. And so having unrealistic expectations or imbalanced expectations in general in relationships can kill a relationship or at least really undermine it. And that same principle applies to ourselves. Part of understanding type, one of the biggest gifts it gives to us is helping us calibrate our expectations of ourselves. It means that we don't go easy on ourselves when we should have higher expectations. And it means that when we're not automatically good at something, we don't beat ourselves up. We set our expectations accordingly. So a big piece of self-love, or removing one of the obstructions to self-love, is calibrating and dialing in our expectations for ourselves. It means not letting ourselves off the hook or going easy when we should be pushing harder so that we can build self-confidence and self-trust. And it means that if we need to have more reasonable lowered expectations, then we do that without thinking we're bad and wrong or have poor character.
I'm thinking about, is it a Saturday Night Live skit? Lowered expectations.
That would be Mad TV
Mad
of the
TV.
90s.
That's right.
Right.
It's only old people will know that reference. Yeah. Pardon me, young person that may not know that reference.
That's right.
That's my brain went there. So let's jump into it. We can jump right into the driver, technically called the dominant for INTPs. Introverted thinking. We've called it accuracy.
Yeah.
This part of us, anybody's driver, not just INTPs, but particularly INTPs, you have a lot of capacity here. And you probably have a lot of expectation for yourself here. Like, you have a lot available to you around accuracy and introverted thinking.
Well, the challenge, though, and this same dynamic follows for every type, that because we have the highest degree of certainty in our first function, this dominant or driver function, we end up sometimes we end up not fulfilling the high expectations we should have for ourselves because we are self-validating at whatever level we're accomplishing. So this is a place of high expectation for people with INTP preferences. If they are not maximizing and optimizing what they can do in this function, they're leaving money on the table. And there's an inner wisdom part of us, an inner knowing, a whole self part that is aware of when we are cutting ourselves slack and we shouldn't be. And that also undermines our self-confidence. It's like, why am I being lazy in something I could actually be excelling at? Why am I allowing myself to do less than when I could be doing so much more and really seeing my highest potential? So when somebody has INTP preferences and they don't have high expectations of themselves here, and they don't work to meet those high expectations, it is a source of undermining self-trust and self-confidence that can go undiagnosed for a super long time. So how does somebody with INTP preferences fulfill high expectations in introverted thinking or accuracy? Well, the first one is by being rigorous with one's own logic. That's part of what the function does. It categorizes, it defines, it tries to make sense of the world, it tries to figure out what's logically congruent and consistent. It's looking for what makes sense of everything, and it's seeking the truth.
I would argue it's seeking core principles, which is truth, but like the core principles that truth is built upon as well.
Right. Well, because truth is a squirmy thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so usually it's not truth with a capital T you're finding, it's core principles and processes. It's more about the process of how to think than the conclusions you come to.
Yeah, I think that's the point I was trying to make. It's not like the truth is a deliverable, right, and once we find it, now we have it forever.
Right.
Like, truth is not relative, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes. Well, it
is contextual in some ways.
It's frequently unknowable. Right.
There you go.
Yeah. So while there might be an objective truth out there, we as humans are not super good at finding it because we have so many things about ourselves that muddy the waters. And so introverted thinking, when it's maximizing its potential and has high expectations for itself, it is refining its processes over and over and over again, and it's questioning premises. And that includes its own premises. So the challenge with having a high degree of certainty here and being so self-validating, which is one of the beautiful things about both introverted thinking, and then we'll also talk about this with anytime we talk about introverted feeling or authenticity. The function itself is self-validating. And when it is your highest degree of certainty, it means that one of the core characteristics you come with is an ability to self-validate. Oh, I'm right. Right? That's what introverted thinking or accuracy is a driver function. thinks all the time, I'm right, right? I figured it out. I thought about it. I did my deep dive. I did all the research. I put the thought labor in. I'm right, right? And that's really nice, actually, because there's so many personality types that struggle with self-validating. It's like really hard for them to self-validate. They need evidence in the outside world. They need other people's feedback. They need something tangible to point to. They can't just go, oh, I know, I'm right, right? And if they do, it's usually coming from a place of uncertainty, not a place of certainty, right?
Yeah.
So part of an INTP's getting over the certainty to really mine the most out of this is knowing that you're going to survive, and in fact you will thrive every time you discover you're wrong about something. It it needs to get to a place where discovering you're wrong, discovering that your processes can be refined, your thinking processes can be refined, is a joyful moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be refining that process gets you better results too. I mean, I know I'm more result focused in my life, and I know not necessarily this function is about results, but I think it does follow that if my process is clean, my results will probably automatically be clean. So if I get stressed about the results, why don't I just focus on the process again? I'll get back to what I know to be true here.
Mhm.
And that feels like more controllable, and it's very much something I think an INTP plays in.
Yeah, and there's a big reward in this function for any time one experiences competence.
Mm.
So another part of maximizing this isn't just getting good at thought labor, isn't just getting good at analysis and refining processes, although that's where it starts. Like you have to question your own premises. You have to question other people's premises, and then you have to question your own premises. And then whatever conclusion you come to after that, you have to question those premises again. You just keep refining, keep folding in, and keep questioning those premises over and over and over again until you have the cleanest thinking system. Generally, you have to remove your own biases. So there's a little bit of disassociation from self that comes in here, which is it doesn't matter what I want to think. It doesn't matter what my agenda is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the conclusions I come to with my refined process mean I have to make really life devastating decisions, right? Like maybe I'm in the wrong relationship or in the wrong religion or whatever. All of that is on the table for a well honed introverted thinking or accuracy function. And then it takes this capacity to refine a process and pours it into skill development.
Hmm.
So I have a friend who has INTP preferences, and he says that being an INTP is like playing life on hard mode. And he's like, and plenty of people play on hard mode in video games poorly. Like they set it to hard mode and then they barely make it through. It's like playing life on hard mode and then trying to master hard mode. He's like, that's when an INTP really comes into their own. It's easy to be his impression is it's easy to be an INTP poorly, like to play it poorly. He's like, but to play it well, to really build those skills, to love when you found a hole in your information, to love when you've been proved wrong, to love refining your processes no matter how it makes you feel. He's like, that's when you're playing hard mode well. And that's the money left on the table for people who have dysfunction and are not optimizing that.
Yeah. And I could see an INTP that maybe doesn't push themselves or they're not focused on that process. It does erode a little bit of the self-trust, a little bit of the self feeling like I've got this. I got the competence to make it happen. And any of that retraction energy now could now eat away at self-love. So what we're saying is by putting effort here and attuning to this, questioning your own assumptions, growing your skill, not just your philosophical understanding of systems, but maybe the application of that understanding as well. That's really the nuance I'm hearing. Like getting into some action, a little bit more action focused potentially to apply maybe the competence or skill. Now you're saying, oh, I've got more. I like this. I love this about myself. Now it's another avenue for self-love for an INTP.
Right. It's removing the obstruction from not having observed yourself perform out your skill and competence.
Yep.
If you're just staying in a conceptual place inside your head, you can self-validate and you can feel a high degree of certainty that you're really good at stuff. But there's always a part of you that's like, but am I, or am I just telling myself that?
Hmm.
It has to be put to the test. And so when somebody with INTP preferences puts that to the test over and over again and discovers fail points and then gets excited about discovering fail points so that they can refine the process and get even more competent and capable, that's when you see an INTP that does not lack motivation. And the number one indicator, I would say, of somebody who is not optimizing their introverted thinking or accuracy, which, by the way, is a function that loves optimization.
Mm.
When this function is not optimized, you will see a lack of motivation from the INTP.
Lack of focus, lack of motivation, lack
Mhm.
of any like lust for life,
Yep.
libido.
Yep.
It can often
Exactly.
be a really dense feeling.
Mhm.
Okay, so growing capacity here, focusing on this, applying those frameworks. Let's move over to the Copilot auxiliary function for INTPs.
Can I make one more
Sure.
comment about this?
Throw it in.
So, just to stay consistent with some of the other
Yeah.
podcasts that we've done on type. So Dr. John Beebe, whose model we'll be pulling on through the rest of the podcast, John says that this function, the driver or dominant function, is part of what he calls the axis to relating to self, or the axis of relating to self, meaning that introverted thinking or accuracy is how an INTP sees themselves. It's the part of a massive part of their self definition. And this is part of the reason why it's so important in order to feel, to remove the obstructions of self love and to, to really hone in and tap into it. Because when you watch yourself improve over time, and this is part of how you define yourself, you're basically saying, I'm improving over time, not just the function. Yeah, because we personalize it so much, we can't help ourselves. So this is a crucial part because of it's how we relate to the world as well. It's who we are in our minds. Like, we see ourselves as this function. And so it's really crucial that an INTP gets it dialed in because it's a massive part of their self-definition.
I have a question here. I don't want to derail us too much, but I'm not INTP.
Yeah.
So I might be embarrassing myself in asking this. It sounds contradictory what you said. You said that this function, particularly introverted thinking, disassociates from self to do its best work. And then you just said, Dr. John Beebe says this is how an INTP relates to itself, to be in relationship to self. That seems contradictory to me. Is there a way we can reconcile those two ideas just briefly in case someone's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Those sound like they're completely opposite from each other.
Right. So there is a distinction between defining oneself and associating with oneself, or being associated with the self. So this distinction would be, and I'm not an INTP either. I'm just a lowly ENTP trying to figure it all out with my introverted thinking or accuracy copilot. But there's a way we describe ourselves or define ourselves. Like, if I was to take time to put my character or my identity into a bunch of different words, that's defining the self, right?
Well, I guess how I could say it is, if I was an INTP, I could say I'm an INTP and I have a little bit of self-definition by not attaching to myself so much. It's almost like...
Okay, you just said it in the easy way.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying that's how, like, what you're saying. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I didn't want to take too much time, but you can completely go through the math as well.
Well, I was going to say associating with oneself, in like the difference between disassociating with oneself and associating with oneself is to be completely in one's own experience.
There you go.
Right? An agenda and all the things that make you feel a certain way. So associating with self is more like being unable to take a detached perspective. And so, yes, the easy way of saying it, the use 1,000 words when 10 words will do way of saying it is, I define myself as a person who can detach and look at things objectively.
Yeah. I did not mean to hijack your math. And all the INTPs are going to be mad at me too. Like, I wanted to hear what she was going to say, Joel.
No,
you ruined it for all of us.
I think you said it in the most pithy way possible. So you did a good job.
Okay. So let's move over to the Copilot auxiliary function of extroverted intuition. That's its technical name. We've nicknamed it exploration. It's about, exploring the world in a imaginative way, finding the disparate patterns of the world and finding new connections and imagination. What's possible is really the question that this function, if it was embodied and personaed, this is what it would ask. What's possible? What's next? What if? These kinds of questions.
Yeah, exactly. It's imagination applied to the outer world in real time. And so it ends up as pattern recognition a lot of times, like fast. So, and like you said, it's what are the possibilities, right? What if? So when we move from the driver to the copilot, or like you mentioned, what's technically called the auxiliary function, John says this is now the axis of relating to other people. And he mentions it has a parental energy to it. So we instinctively, all of us, use our copilot or auxiliary function in service to others in a parental way. So if somebody has a need, they pop up with a need, we kind of instinctively grab our auxiliary or co-pilot function to fill the need. And we are very rewarded when we do that. When an INTP is uh, at their best, they are watching themselves provide this service to the world. They're watching themselves contribute to society, not just with their thinking process, but also their intuition. And so, in a parental role, it oftentimes looks like seeing possibilities for other people. You might see people at their best, at their highest potential. You might see all of the different opportunities they have in life and all of the different ways that their future could roll out. It might be helping people understand concepts that are hard, right? Like helping them make connections inside their own minds to understand something that's complicated. It might be, observing how somebody can solve a problem in their life in a way that's quite elegant. There's a lot of ways that INTPs offer this intuition in a parental way. And we don't always I've mentioned in the other podcasts on it's the same theme. Parents offer their services thanklessly
Hmm.
in the sense that we don't always need to be given credit for it. It's like we may or may not ever be thanked by our children for raising us or for raising them. And that's okay because the parental energy comes in and there's a reward to it simply by having been able to serve with the function. And that's important for INTPs to watch themselves provide this service. It can also be through innovation, right? The extroverted intuition or exploration function is very tied to like that what if, like what if we did it this way? And so it can be through innovative technology. It doesn't just have to be communicating to somebody their potential. It could be helping people have a better future through the potential of technology or through different instruments in that way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways that the parental energy can roll out.
Well, and I'll just say again, if you're an INTP, maybe this is a good way to think about it. I might be oversimplifying it, but if your dominant or driver function of introverted thinking or accuracy takes information and really creates a framework and zooms in on that information to get it really precise and find the truth and the logic in that, well, what happens to all the territory outside of that information maybe you're focused on? This is the part of you that expands the territory. It can see outside of maybe the specialty you have or the competences you've built. It's the imaginative part that can go, wait, what's outside of this framework here? And you can bring more information in, see more options for yourself. You don't feel stuck maybe or as rigid or as tied to the body of knowledge that you've mastered potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So these things work in tandem for an INTP. And if you can dial both of these in together, it can feel very good to move through the world from a strength in both of these front functions, both your driver or dominant and your co-pilot or auxiliary.
Right, exactly. And through that, you can model open-mindedness to others. That's a big part of how the parental energy comes out too, is that you caution people against narrow-mindedness or getting too stuck in their thinking. And part of that is teaching them to see a different way of thinking or to see those possibilities as communicated through articulation, which introverted thinking or accuracy is very articulate. So it's like teaching people how to think in a more open-minded way. And it also models weirdness, right? Extroverted intuition or exploration has like a very iconoclastic feel about it. And when an INTP really uses this in service to the world, they're okay with being a little weird, right? And they model what it looks like to accept one's own weirdnesses.
Yeah.
So this is a part of ourself that we can tap into in one of two ways. We can use it for others. And the way that it gets expressed as self-love is when it's being used in behalf of other people and you see those gains, you see somebody understand their potential by looking through your eyes, or you help somebody see a better future coming, right? Even though the world can seem bleak and dark sometimes. When you observe that, there's an enormous sense of well-being that comes from serving the world, right? There's an enormous you don't need to be thanked. Like you just feel good having done it, having been optimistic in behalf of others, having served with technology or whatever it is, however it ends up manifesting. So one of the ways that it helps an INTP experience greater self-love, removes obstructions, is that we all get an enormous sense of well-being when we are of service to others, when we're contributing to society. So that's one way that it helps with self-love. And the other way is when an INTP learns to self-parent with it, learns to turn that on themselves. So now they see themselves at their highest potential. They see all of the opportunities and possibilities for their own life. They model weirdness to themselves, meaning that they are very self-accepting and go, yeah, I'm a little bit of a weirdo. That's fine. And they allow themselves to stay in an open-minded frame and not get too narrow-minded. And all of those things, either in service to others, which gives them that sense of well-being of serving society, or blasting all of that optimism and positivity their own direction. In both ways, it removes obstructions to self-love. It removes those parts of ourselves that are like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. This part goes, no, you actually are. Well, look at all of your potential. You just have to manifest it. And then an INTP can feel a lot better having integrated this part for themselves as well.
Yeah. Ready to move to the 10-year-old?
Yep.
Or what's technically called the tertiary part of an INTP's cognition. This has a function that lives here we've nicknamed memory. We say it's got the certainty, sophisticated certainty of about a 10-year-old person, 10-year-old child. I guess person, child.
Human.
Technical name for this is introverted sensing. This is all about tracking changes over time, even small, minute changes, procedures. It often seeks comfort, safety, knowing, preparedness, these kinds of qualities. Again, I'm overgeneralizing and oversimplifying. It does a lot. This is a lot of the energy it might bring for an INTP in their world. So this is the part of an INTP that can help with routine, can help know what the social expectations are sometimes, even though we're going to talk about another part of your cognition that really knows that too. This can sometimes help know what the procedural expectations are in life. You know, like I'm supposed to graduate and do this next and do the kind of on the checklist of life, whatever it is, if you buy into that. So this is going to be a really grounding part of INTPs, and it can help them keep a routine and rhythm and all that. Now, because it's 10 years old and kind of its certainty in the world, it tends to have a proving energy to it in all of our cognition, no matter if you're INTP or not. Like all of us have this 10-year-old part, and each person, it looks a little different, but there's a little bit of a proving nature, a little bit of I'm uncertain here. So how do I know if I'm doing it well or not? I need some outer sense of validation or some response, something back to me that tells me that I'm not screwing this up, that I'm okay. I'm validating this part of myself. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where we can look at self-love here, because now we could enter this frame of like, okay, I got to do better to earn love for myself. This is where I think we start to get into the place where that earning of love, and the next function we're going to talk about too, that inferior 3-year-old, I think that also shows up here.
Yep. Yeah. So looking at it through the frame of setting expectations, the driver dominant, introverted thinking accuracy, set high expectations and do everything you can to meet them. That will help you feel like you are maximizing and optimizing who you are, and you'll feel great about that. When it comes to the co-pilot or auxiliary of extroverted intuition or exploration, have high expectations for yourself. Don't let yourself off the hook. Expect that you need to be contributing to society. Go for more. Push yourself. Don't let yourself off the hook.
These are your professional parts, if you will. These are the parts you show up and you really put attention to every day.
When you get to the 10-year-old or the tertiary function, now you need to be setting your expectations a little bit more realistically.
You're more of an amateur here.
Yeah, right. And even though you're looking for validation from the outside world because you are uncertain and you're hoping the world will go, no, you're doing just fine. One should still set their expectations accordingly, kind of like a 10-year-old. If I have super high expectations of my daughter, who is 11, but wasn't 10 that long ago, if I have super high adult level expectations for her, I end up crushing her spirit because she just can't meet them. She's just never going to do that. And it's not like you can't get skilled. It's not like you can't build a bunch of great stuff in this function. But because of that level of uncertainty, you're never going to feel as good as an adult would about their choices and decisions, just because you're pre-wired to go, am I doing this right? So if you don't do it right, as opposed to beating yourself up and thinking mommy and daddy will never love you or whatever, because you're a 10-year-old that, should have a lot of wiggle room for making mistakes. If mistakes are made in this function, you got to see it the same way. There needs to be some wiggle room. You should have expectations to do your best, but not expectations that you're ever going to match the competence or capability of the first two functions.
I'll say there's another level of certainty too here. Just like a child who mom and dad might congratulate them on things that they're like, it wasn't that good. Are they just telling me that because they're my mom? and there's uncertainty. Like, is she saying that because it was actually good, or is it because it's my mom saying it? I don't know, as a 10-year-old might say, like a literal 10-year-old in a dynamic. This part of you might also, like, you might still get good feedback from the world, but you may not trust it because you're uncertain. Are they telling me that because it really is, or are they just trying to get something else? Like, even if you get good feedback about this part of you, you still have questions because there's uncertainty there. So it doesn't just help to get the outer world feedback. So showing yourself self-love here, even if you could have a perfect conditions for the feedback from the outer world, you'd still probably not accept it. And that's everybody, not just INTPs, because we're uncertain on what does it mean and how do we interpret it.
Yep, exactly. So this is the other side of the axis of relating to others, as John mentioned. It's the other side of the co-pilot of extroverted intuition or exploration. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of different ways that an INTP can build a healthy relationship with the part of who they are and really help uh, uh, beautify their entire personality type, while at the same time setting reasonable expectations for performance. And one of the best ways to do that is to have it be a helper to the parental energy of the co-pilot or auxiliary function. So when you see your potential as an INTP, when you experience all the things you could be, as opposed to just letting that be a nice, pleasant thought and go, yeah, I'm a total badass inside my head, right, in a self-validating way.
Yeah.
You now use the introverted sensing or memory function, this 10-year-old, to work out a routine, a plan, a template, a schematic, some way of, in a grounded way, building those skills, actually taking the action that you need to do. And by setting parameters, having a duty to it, being disciplined, right? Like if you're like, okay, so I'm going to set a goal for myself that I'm going to get, like really strong physically. That requires discipline of eating. It requires discipline of routine in order to go to the gym. It requires a bunch of different things.
Tracking metrics, like tracking and measuring. Yeah.
You got it. Tracking changes over time to see how much you've improved. All of that is going to be necessary for extroverted intuition or explorations, knowing what's possible to actually manifest it in a real way, not just in an idea.
Yeah.
So when we take our 10-year-old function and use it in conjunction with the co-pilot, now we actually are manifesting all the stuff that we knew we just thought was possible, or getting to work and an innovation, right? And then setting a routine and just working it every day, grinding it out. Setting protocols, helping manifest in reality the things of the imagination.
Yeah. Okay. So we also can look at this too. That co-pilot or auxiliary function has a pretty close relationship to that 10-year-old or tertiary function. So exploration and memory have this relationship to each other. Mm-hmm. And you can almost look at it. We've talked about this on the other podcast. We're talking about loving yourself like a coin. That when one side is facing up and we're engaged with it, well, the other side is down and we can't really see it or access it. And then if you flip it, the reverse is true. And a good relationship here is really not being overly focused on one side of this over the other. It's not just living in your co-pilot auxiliary and just pumping that full of all your energy and attention and ignoring your 10-year-old, this part of you. It's not ignoring, which is what happens even more, ignoring your co-pilot or just not giving it proper due and over focusing and over supporting and being in the energy of that 10-year-old or tertiary. It's about the balance between them. So the metaphor you've used in other episodes, Antonia, is like taking that same coin that can be flipped, but putting it on its side and spinning it. And as it's spinning, it's really hard to tell which side is facing you. It's happening so fast. It's oscillating so quickly that there's access to both sides. And that's really the relationship, metaphorically, that we're trying to get with these two parts of ourselves. All of us are. And for you as an INTP, that balance between exploration and memory is so powerful. It's such a powerful thing to have in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to integrate it into the co-pilot to have that relationship, because without the intuitive side, without the extroverted intuitive side, introverted sensing or memory can become the opposite of grounded. It can be more passively consumptive, like endlessly researching all the details of a piece of information might be fascinating and might make you feel like you know a lot more, like it feels like you're increasing your competence by understanding more information, but it's not actually skill development. It's not actually increasing your competence. But if your extroverted intuition or exploration first sees what's possible in competence and wants it, it wants to reach out for that potential. It wants to answer the question of what if, then as opposed to just consuming information with introverted sensing or memory and being all detail oriented about the information gathering, it's now not just consuming, it's now being part of the creation process. So the details that matter are in the mastery of the skill, not in the information consumption.
Not an understanding, but an application.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, or just knowledge gathering or whatever. And so all of the beautiful things that come along with this function then are not, it's not like they're directly validated by the outside world. Like, oh, you know so much, right? Or whatever it is. They're being validated through the experience of giving the competence and skills to serve others. Like it's not, it is, the proof is in the pudding, basically. So when you use the quote unquote axis of relating to others, that co-pilot 10-year-old in conjunction with each other, and now you're using it in service of others, then you as a person gets validated. Thank you so much for doing that. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that somebody who knew about this subject was around to help me figure it out. Well, thank you so much for, being the kind of person who can just help me solve my problems. There are so many beautiful things that come along with it, so that the whole person gets the validation cookies, not just that part. And when it's used in conjunction with extroverted intuition or exploration, now it's not a paranoid that other people are going to be judging its weirdness. One of the ways that the uncertainty of this function can drag an INTP down is that they're worried that other people will think that they're too weird, that they're not following those societal expectations, that they're, they're too iconoclastic, or that they're not responsible enough, right? These are all things that can feel really undermining to an INTP's self-confidence, and it can become an obstruction to self-love. But if the introverted sensing or memory function is creating what's called that flipping of the coin, the using those two functions in conjunction with each other so fast you almost can't pull them apart, that's called a transcendent function. That's what Carl Jung called it. It transcends both the qualities of both sides. And when it's being used as a transcendent function, now it's not worried about other people's impressions. It's not worried about somebody judging it as weird or judging it as irresponsible. Now it's watching itself perform in behalf of other people, and the person just thanks the individual for being so skilled, or thanks them for having done the hard work of being consistent, having done the actual duty of becoming the best version of themselves. And so it's not undermining anymore. Now it's removing obstructions to self-love, because one of those obstructions an INTP can experience is, am I giving to other people? Am I of value to others? That can be very undermining thoughts. And then you watch yourself do it by using this transcendent function experience in service to others. So getting that part dialed in is really important for INTPs to rest into themselves and not feel insecure about just being who they are.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I'm drawing the principle that proof, seeing yourself and proving to yourself, helps all of us. If we can watch ourselves do something or prove ourselves, if we can see the results, we can say, I did that. I can feel good about that. I just observed myself doing that. And that contributes to self-love. And that's where this part of us relating to others can come out. We can observe ourselves actually giving to others and go, I'm giving to others. That's a good relationship with myself. Yeah. I need to freely give love on that channel because I'm giving to others. Okay, let's talk about the other part of the INTP now, the part that's going to be a little bit more trouble zone. This is the sophistication or uncertainty level of a 3-year-old child. This is the technical name is the inferior cognitive function. In the car model, it's that 3-year-old backseat on the bottom left of the quadrant. It's directly opposite and behind the driver or dominant function. This for an INTP is technically called extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. People that are good at this, man, they get social vibe. They get social contracts. They understand, wordless, inarticulate, emotional communication between people. They understand things like, status in a room or the dynamics, relationship dynamics between people and all the emotional, unconscious, unspoken things we pass between each other as humans. So if you're an INTP moving through the world, this is part of you. This is part of your cognition. This is part of what you're kind of attending to and seeing in the world. Now, your sophistication varies. You can build some skill here. You can build some competence here, but I don't think that we know that that part of you that's uncertain about this is never going to go away. You're always going to feel uncertain here, even if you have built incredible skill. You could be the most competent person in the world at this, and you still are going to feel uncertain. And so this can really undermine for an INTP a sense of self-love. Like, well, I can't love myself. I'm not good at this part, or I can't see these things, or people don't give me validation around I don't think I can show myself love because maybe I don't know how that looks. Like, this can really mess up the self-love aspects of an INTP's life.
Yeah. The way I always say it is it's deep uncertainty. Like, it's deep. It goes real deep. And as self-validating as an INTP is with their introverted thinking or accuracy, which is like, I know I'm right. I know I've done more research, or I've done more thinking about this or whatever. As self-validating as an INTP can be, they're very uncertain about how the world experiences them, right? Do other people think I have value? So the deep uncertainty isn't just in like, am I a good person? It's, does anybody else think I'm a competent, capable person? Or am I a competent person? An INTP would be like, yeah, of course I'm skilled and competent.
I mean, it might be more crass than that. Does the group want me around?
Yes.
That might be how it's actually asked from this part of you. Like, a really childlike. It's like, am I liked? Did they want me around? Like that. Yeah. I know it sounds silly and maybe I'm being insulting, but that's not, again, this is an uncertain part of you, maybe childlike.
It's not insulting. It is very relatable. Does anybody like me? Does anybody want me around? Is the perfect way of saying that. Absolutely. And so the challenge here, and the reason why it can be so undermining to feeling love for the self as an INTP is, you mentioned that I'm not competent or capable in this certain way, or like in this way. But I think the other piece of it is when an INTP flees the uncomfortable feeling of extroverted feeling or harmony, which, by the way, is all about connecting with other people, like you said, vibing, reading a room, knowing the right thing to say, knowing how to manage and maintain relationships.
Knowing simple stuff like, how do I end this conversation without that person feeling weird or bad? Like, I don't want to be rude, but I don't know how to stop this conversation and move on to the next thing. Like, little stuff like that, sometimes INTPs report it's a struggle.
Exactly.
And that's okay. It's just, that's where they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of discomfort that comes from, like, I should know this. This is basic social stuff. Like, how do I end a conversation? How do I go up to a group of people and introduce myself? How do I maintain connections when I said something that made total sense to me and everybody else acted like I was insensitive or rude? How do I navigate this entire territory? When an INTP flees the feeling of uncertainty and takes refuge back up in introverted thinking or accuracy by going, well, I'm smart and everybody else is an idiot, or like, I'm awesome, it's everybody else that doesn't make sense. They're all stupid and they all want everybody to play these dumb games and I'm not going to play that. The challenge is your inner wisdom knows you're lying to yourself.
Ooh.
Right. It knows that it is reasonable that social creatures find ways of interfacing. It's reasonable that we would build a modicum of social skills to be able to have connection.
It doesn't mean it's your preference. It just makes sense.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean you would prefer it as an INTP, but you're saying that if an INTP is really honest with themselves, it makes sense this is how it works.
Exactly. And so by rejecting it all and saying that's dumb and stupid, right? That's like, all the social rules are idiotic. You know that that's not intellectually congruent. You know you're lying to yourself. And so an avoidance of extroverted feeling or harmony causes inconsistent logic or incongruent thinking and introverted thinking or accuracy. And now it's back to lowered expectations. Now you're not at your full wattage. Now you're not doing your best in where you should be doing your best. And now it creates an obstruction to feeling full, true self-love.
Yeah.
So that avoidance of extroverted feeling or harmony is very undermining to an INTP self-love.
So let's talk about what to do about it.
Right.
Like, how do we have a proper expectation about this? If an INTP is listening or watching right now, how do they have a proper expectation about this part of themselves?
Well, just like with the 10-year-olds, where we have to lower our expectations of what we're going to be able to accomplish all by itself, right? We have to have reasonable expectations, not no expectations, not like completely give this part of you a pass, but we have to have reasonable expectations meeting the function where it's at. Like you said, this is the level of uncertainty of a 3-year-old function. That doesn't mean, I mean, you could be raising a genius. You could be raising a 3-year-old that is already, writing out paragraphed essays. Who knows? But they're going to be deeply uncertain. So that's the one thing you can't get away from. So have expectations of yourself that meet that level of uncertainty, indicating that sometimes you don't know whether or not you passed or failed. You actually don't know whether or not that group of people likes you or doesn't like you. You're not sure if you said the wrong thing. You're not sure if you failed. And you have to kind of sit with that discomfort. You have to sit with that uncertainty and still think, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, right? Like, I'm learning a skill. I'm figuring it out. I can't 100% kick it up to my strength. I can't intellectually deduce what the most reasonable thing to say at any given moment is. I would love to do that, but I can't. I have to just vibe. I have to just kind of feel the person in real time and determine what their thing is about, right? I have to just vibe with them. And when an INTP can give themselves permission to start building skill in an arena that they will never actually feel competent around, because competence is always the goal. That feeling of competence is what an INTP is seeking. That's the reward. So you're building a skill in something that you're never going to have a certainty around being competent in, but you can watch yourself develop some competence over time. You can go, well, I'm not the awkward person that sat in my room all the time playing video games. I'm now somebody who goes out and meet people. I meet people. I have friends. I have connections. I don't always say the wrong thing. When an INTP can integrate that part of who they are and make peace with that feeling, then now there's no self-deception. There's no eroding of self-love through the deception of introverted thinking going, yeah, but I'm awesome. Everybody else sucks. There is there's a feeling that even in the stuff that's the toughest, I'm still going to push through. I'm still going to allow myself to meet myself at my highest potential, even if my potential in this is not as high as all the rest of the parts of me. I'm still going to try. I'm still going to do my best. And, well, look, I actually do have relationships. I actually do have people who invite me into their home and hang out with me. Okay, all right, I can do this, right? This is something I can do. And now the obstruction of loneliness is put out of the way. The obstruction to self-love of feeling perpetually lonely. The obstruction to, feeling like you can't handle basic things is removed out of the way because you start watching yourself, experience or handle basic things. It is just a conduit to that last piece of really feeling like, okay, I'm good. It's all right. I'm not just self-validating. I actually am a person who is watching myself do well on hard mode.
Yeah. So the meta pattern I'm picking up for INTPs, but what we're talking about is that if there's cognitive dissonance in any part of your car model of personality or your cognitive function stack, that can erode self-confidence because it's not your unconscious mind at least knows it's not really true. So especially this 3-year-old process, but also probably the 10-year-old or any part of you, but those are two to watch out for. So we don't want to an INTP would not want to erode a sense of self-confidence by allowing cognitive dissonance to get a foothold. And because that's a downward cycle, right? Or a downward spiral. So the idea then is what the axis point for self-love is to continue. And we talked about this at the very beginning with the driver function. Continue to refine and root out your own cognitive dissonance with your dominant driver. With your co-pilot, you're going to want to self-parent, not just give good ideas and what-if scenarios and possibilities and imagination to the people all around you and your world and your job and all these things, but also go, well, I need that for myself, and you're going to do it for yourself. You're going to tune all that possibility and creativity and openness and what-if questions to you as an INTP. Then you're going to create a balance with that memory part, that 10-year-old part, where you're going to have good routine. You're going to focus on supporting that imaginative part of you, continuing to expand the territory there and the knowledge base there and track progress over time to see yourself overcoming obstacles and getting better. As your competence grows, you're taking account of it with your 10-year-old process and you're watching it and you're building your self-confidence, which also gives you an avenue for self-love. And then with that extroverted feeling or harmony, knowing it's going to always be deeply uncertain and making sure it doesn't get the foothold of cognitive dissonance in there. Make sure that you're really being careful with that. Not let that fester and root it out when you see it.
Yep.
And now we've got a pretty good operational personality type for INTPs.
Yep. And going back to that extroverted feeling or harmony, that 3-year-old or inferior function, it's the other half of John's axis of relating to self. And it's important to remember that how you experience your relational value is going to be a part of your overall identity or how you value yourself, whether or not you like it. And so one of the things that the driver and the 3-year-old can model is the co-pilot and the 10-year-old's ability to get into rapport with itself and work together in tandem, like create that transcendent function. When an INTP integrates extroverted feeling or harmony, they have the same capacity. They have the ability to merge it with introverted thinking or accuracy, like spinning a coin, and turn it transcendent. And when that happens, the last little vestiges, the last obstructions to self-love are usually locked in. So one of the big obstructions to self-love can be terrible relationships, right? And INTPs are surprisingly conflict avoidant when they haven't integrated extroverted feeling or harmony, because they don't want the relational conflict. They don't want the emotions of the other person. Their introverted thinking or accuracy will totally, communicate truth. It will totally say what it's thinking, but it doesn't want to do it with somebody who is important to them. Because what if that person freaks out? And then I won't be able to deal with all of the emotion of it. I won't be able to deal with them being the heat of the situation. So an INTP, it's not uncommon for people with INTP preferences to enter codependent relationships or unhealthy relationships, ones that really erode their impression of themselves, really erode their feelings about who they are.
Yeah.
And so integrating that and going, no, I don't like it when somebody's mad. I kind of hate dealing with the emotions of conflict. I hate dealing with somebody who's heated. I hate doing all of that. But it's important to confront problems. It's important to be radically honest in a relationship. It's important to say them early. And when that happens, now we've got both honesty and relational sensitivity working in tandem with each other. And now we've got somebody who's not going to allow themselves to get in an unhealthy codependent relationship. They just won't let themselves, because this is part of how they see who they are, is the ability to do this. And so specifically for INTPs, one of the big obstructions that they have when they are in relationship, we already mentioned the obstruction of loneliness. But when they get into relationships, the obstruction of bad relationships where people treat them poorly, that can be so corrosive to one's self-confidence, self-trust, etc. So that is a big key.
I want to zoom on this idea of treating somebody poorly, treating somebody anything. That refers to action. And they could tell you they love you all day. And you're like, okay, but you keep treating me this way. The action shows what you really believe and feel about me. Mm-hmm. And so we know this about love. We know that love is a verb. Love is expressed by how we act. It's how we service. It's how we send our love, the action, the verb of it. And so with that in mind too, it's nice to have self-talk. Like, I love myself. I appreciate myself. It's really good. And we need self-talk with our partners that we're in relationship with, our friendships, family, whoever. I love you. I respect you. All these words are great, but love is expressed as a verb. And that would apply to self as well. Mm-hmm. So as you think about yourself as an INTP, again, being an introvert, being intuitive, being more cerebrally minded, conceptually minded, you're going to have a hard time. Sometimes you may have a challenge, I'll say it that way, showing love to yourself in an action way, in a verb, like expressing it that way. Just like we all have trouble getting into action around a lot of things, but I think INTPs need to really focus on, okay, how can I show myself love? Not just have self-talk, not just have a conceptual sense of self-worth and self-love. What do I do to show myself love? And I think that's really the question I would have. If I were an INTP listening or watching right now, I'd say, okay, what are the actions? How do I actually show myself love in a tangible way, day to day? Not just say it, but show it. And one of those, for example, if you were in a relationship, I mean, the examples could be all over the place. I mean, there's probably unlimited examples, but if you were in a relationship that was codependent, or the person was saying something but not showing it, is to create boundaries. That's an action to show your self-love, to say, well, I'm going to put a boundary here and not allow that to be the relationship anymore. And I'm going to show self-love by taking that action, as an example. That's just one example with the dynamic you just expressed, Antonia. It made me think of that.
Yeah.
So I think the meta question is, how do you keep showing yourself? How does love a verb in your life as an INTP for the self?
Fabulous. That's absolutely true. And when one has said the wrong thing or triggered a loved one unintentionally, or entered into a codependent relationship and finds themselves having trouble getting out of it, or questions their value to other people, have reasonable expectations of this part of you and forgive yourself for having done that. Forgive yourself for entering a codependent relationship, but now show self-love by making plans to remove yourself from the codependent relationship, or changing the codependent. Like sometimes, because we're half the problem in codependence, sometimes if we change, the person with us goes, oh, this is better to not be codependent. I actually wanted this. And sometimes they were just as much guilty of it and they don't want to change. But regardless, whatever it is, show yourself love by not allowing relationships on those terms anymore.
Yeah.
And forgive yourself for having done it in the first place, because you need to have reasonable expectations of yourself as an individual who just has challenges navigating this territory.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really brilliant, Joel, to remind ourselves that love is a verb. And when we show ourselves love and receive it, it's because we're taking actions to protect ourselves.
Yeah. So we talk about INTP self-love now. We're personality hacker, not INTP hacker, right? And we have other personality types listening along, other 15 types. How can we take what an INTP can learn about self-love? How do the rest of us learn from this? What is something, a takeaway that no matter what your personality type is today, listening about the INTP, because you probably learned a lot about INTP, and maybe how they can show self-love. What can we take for the self as an ENFP preferences? What could I learn from INTP's self-love? What can I take away from this? And what can the person listening right now? Do we have some ideas?
Yeah. So personally, when I see an INTP that is truly showing themselves love and receiving it fully, and they do that through having high expectations for themselves, meeting them, high expectations in their skills, becoming really competent. I'm very inspired by just how self-disciplined they can be. Like there's an extraordinary capacity that INTPs have. It's like playing life on hard mode. And if somebody plays a video game on hard mode and does extremely well, they usually become some of the best at playing that game. So an INTP is playing life on hard mode, and if they do it well, they can become exceptionally capable and competent people. And one area this shows up in a surprising way is how they can actually become pragmatic peacekeepers. So that whole challenge with relationship piece, when an INTP is at their best, they actually are some of the best at resolving conflict. They show up in a situation, the ability to disassociate from self means that when they're watching two people argue, and they can do it for themselves, but they're exceptionally good with other people.
With the skill build.
With the skill build. That's right.
The capacity to sit there with conflict or emotion. I mean, it's not just an INTP out of the hatch does this.
Right.
No. You have to build some competence.
Exactly. When they've integrated their extroverted feeling or harmony, when they're using a transcendent function, they can come in and be very pragmatic in an argument, very fair-minded, look for a very equitable result, not take sides, point out the thinking of both people. This person is thinking in this way. This person is thinking in this way. Here's the holes in the logic of all of it. Here's what I think is actually the solution. And because they show up with so much pragmatism and a disassociation of agenda, they're not there to take sides. They're not there to say one person has a point and the other person doesn't. Usually they're like, well, you kind of both have a point, but you're also both kind of wrong. That's usually what's happening, right? They're seeing it for how it actually is. Most arguments is both of us are a little bit right and both of us are a little bit wrong. Yeah. And so when they show up with that energy, it's almost like, you'll see a fire in, the sci-fi shows will sometimes show a fire, and then a vacuum will open into space and the fire just goes out, right? Because it just can't exist in a vacuum. In that same way, weirdly enough, an introverted thinking user, an INTP in this case, that shows up with that sort of vacuum of emotion can take the heat out of an argument. Just being in the energy of that, just being the energy of that level of logic and pragmatism can sort of rob the heat from other people, almost like they opened up the airlock and then the heat just went out. And it's like the person's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. I guess we were kind of arguing about something that's sort of me and sort of you. And yeah, you're right. That is an equitable, conclusion to it. And you and I both experienced this. We have a friend with INTP preferences who's staying with us. You and I got in a bit of a heated argument in the living room, and down our friend bounds and goes like, listen, I can't work when all of this like disharmony is in, all this discord. So I'm just going to sit down. I'm just going to help you hammer this out so we can get back in a good place so I can go back and work. And they did. They helped us like look, go through the thinking. I was very triggered. You were triggered. It's easy in a relationship to get triggered.
Yeah.
But they just kind of removed the heat from the situation. And like we're at the end of it, we're like, yeah, what were we fighting about? And it was a thing of beauty. It was magic. So that's one of the surprising, inspiring elements that comes from an INTP that really works on themselves. Really working on yourself is basically removing obstructions to showing yourself love. Yeah. That's what it is. A person who's really, an INTP has really worked on themselves, shows that self-love, shows up as the best version of themselves, that they're reaching their potential, they're forgiving themselves for mistakes. Man, can they show up as just absolutely beautifully diplomatic peacekeepers. And personally, I find that inspiring.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an aspirational element to that harmony part of them. It's like I could show up like a diplomat in this way, like a judge, a neutral judge in this format. And I think that is something that INTPs do have capacity for. Again, I think it would be contingent on feeling very confident, self-assured, and feel like I love myself and I'm okay as who I am. And now I have excess to give to others. Mm-hmm. And so I think all those other things need to be operating properly that we talked about in this episode. And if they are, I think you're right. I think that's a great example of our friend who helped us. And it was really very pointed too. It's like, well, okay, it was very like core principle. Like, okay, Joel, you're thinking, you just said such and such and such and such. And here's the thinking is flawed on this one. You're kind of right about this, but actually think about it this way. And I was like, oh, okay. And it kind of calmed me in a way. And then I saw him do it with you too. It's like a very interesting, pragmatic approach, like you said, for peacekeeping. So that would be very surprising to a lot of people that you said that an INTP has the capacity for pragmatic peacekeeping. Mm-hmm. I think that people would be like, oh, really? INTPs, they're known for, stereotypes like science and nerdy stuff. Peacekeeping between people? What? That would be a surprise, I think. Yeah. All right. So what have you been thinking? What's been coming up for you? You're an INTP? Maybe you're early on in your type journey and your maturity process of knowing who you are. When I say maturity, I mean like a mature person. I mean like understanding all this about yourself, although it could be maturity in general too. Or are you more seasoned? You've had a lot of experience in life. You've got some stories behind you and some experience you'd like to share. We want to hear from you no matter where you are on that timeline. Maybe you're not an INTP either. Maybe you're a different type and you want to share too. That's also welcome. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Stories are really great because they're compressed experiences. They can give us a glimpse into your life and how you show up and what's been working for you, hasn't been working for you, where you struggle, some of the human components of what's been going on for you. So come over to personalityhacker.com. Make your voice heard.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on lots of different platforms. Wherever you podcast, subscribe, hit bells, all those things, right? And so that you're informed of new episodes. If you leave a rating and review on iTunes, that review perks us up, makes us feel good. I'm saying us, but I actually mean me. So feel free to leave a review because it makes Antonia Dodge super happy.
Yeah.
And if you have not yet picked up a copy of the INTP Owner's Manual, it's a fabulous program. It helps you get a deep dive into your personality type and also all of these things we're talking about. Like how do you avoid the personality phenomena that can create obstacles to truly appreciating yourself and truly loving yourself. Pick up a copy. They're a fabulous program. And if you already have a copy of the Owner's Manual, if you want to go further, I highly recommend checking out our Personality Life Path program. If it's open during the time period that you're listening to this, to this episode, sign up, get on the interest list. Really, I cannot communicate how much of a game changer Personality Life Path is. It is such a fabulous program filled with amazing people who just, they're all ready to do something big, to get over whatever it is that is creating the obstacle in their life to live the most them possible. So, yeah, come over and I don't know where to send you right now.
Personalityhacker.com is a great place to get resources.
Personalityhacker.com, but come check out the Personality Life Path program.
Yeah, it's kind of like your personality type and who you are and your INTP nature or whatever type you are is the you are here dot on the map of your life. And the Personality Life Path mentorship really works on the actual map of your life, the terrain and the direction and all the things you want, the goals and the optimizations, all that stuff. So those two in tandem work great together. But a great place to start, again, is with the owner's manual. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you as we keep this series rolling on the next Personality Hacker podcast.